Ella Fitzgerald stood backstage at the White House, smoothing down her elegant evening gown one more time. It was February 1962, and she was about to perform for President John F. Kennedy and First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy at a state dinner honoring the Prime Minister of France. This was the White House, the President, international dignitaries. The pressure was immense. She had no idea that in 20 minutes her shoe would break, and that what she did next would become legendary, not for the performance itself, but for the grace with which she handled disaster. This is the story of the night Ella Fitzgerald's heel snapped in front of the most powerful people in America, of the split-second decision that defined professionalism, and of Jackie Kennedy's words backstage that turned embarrassment into triumph. The invitation to perform at the White House had arrived 6 weeks earlier. Ella's manager had called, barely containing excitement. "The President and Mrs. Kennedy want you to perform at a state dinner for the French Prime Minister, February 12th. Ella had been honored and terrified in equal measure. She'd performed for presidents before, Eisenhower at a formal dinner in 1958, Truman at a private event years before that, but the Kennedys were different. Young, glamorous, culturally sophisticated in ways previous administrations hadn't been. Jackie Kennedy was known for her impeccable taste, her support of the arts, her efforts to bring classical music and high culture to the White House, her impossibly high standards for everything from flower arrangements to guest lists. This wasn't just a performance. It was representing American music, American culture, American excellence. To international guests, France, a country with its own rich musical tradition, its own cultural pride. The Prime Minister and his delegation would be judging not just Ella, but America's claim to cultural sophistication. One mistake, one moment of unprofessionalism, one sign that American jazz was somehow lesser than European classical traditions, and it would be remembered forever. The pressure felt enormous. Ella had prepared meticulously. She'd spent weeks selecting her repertoire, a mix of sophisticated American standards and jazz that would showcase the depth and complexity of American popular music. Cole Porter's sophisticated wordplay, George Gershwin's classical jazz fusion, Duke Ellington's elegant compositions, songs that were challenging, musical, refined, nothing too casual or lowbrow. This had to prove that American music belonged on the world stage. She'd chosen her gown weeks in advance, working with a designer to create something appropriate for the White House. Ivory silk, elegant but not flashy, sophisticated without being ostentatious. She'd tried on dozens of pairs of shoes before settling on the perfect ones, elegant heels that matched the gown, professional and dignified, comfortable enough to stand in for the entire performance. She'd rehearsed for hours every day. Not just the songs themselves, she knew those backwards, but the stage presence, the pacing between songs, the way she'd acknowledge the President and First Lady, how she'd introduce each piece to an international audience that might not know the American songbook. Every detail mattered. Every moment would be scrutinized. The evening of February 12th, Ella arrived at the White House early. Security. Preparation, sound check. The East Room had been set up for the performance, chairs arranged for about 200 guests, a small stage area, piano, microphone. The room was stunning, crystal chandeliers, historical paintings, the weight of American history in every corner. Ella tried not to be intimidated. She'd performed in theaters across the world for audiences of thousands, but this felt different, intimate and enormous simultaneously. The guests began arriving. Diplomats, senators, cabinet members, cultural figures, everyone in formal attire, tuxedos and evening gowns, jewelry that cost more than most people's houses. The conversations were in multiple languages, the atmosphere sophisticated and slightly intimidating. Then President Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy entered and the room shifted. Everyone stood, applause, the unmistakable presence of power and grace. Ella watched from backstage. The president looked confident, charismatic, at ease in his element. Jackie was stunning, a pale pink gown, pearls, that particular elegance she made look effortless. They greeted guests, smiled, embodied everything the Kennedys represented to the world. Dinner was served in the state dining room. Ella waited backstage, too nervous to eat much of the meal that had been provided for performers. She ran through the set list in her head, checked her appearance one more time. The gown looked perfect. The shoes felt comfortable. Everything was ready. After dinner, guests returned to the East Room for the performance. Ella could hear the murmur of conversation, the rustle of expensive fabric, the clink of coffee cups being served. The White House social secretary found her. Backstage, 5 minutes, Miss Fitzgerald. The President and Mrs. Kennedy are ready whenever you are. Ella nodded, suddenly unable to speak. This was it, the performance she'd prepared for, worried about, rehearsed endlessly. She took a deep breath, reminded herself, "You're Ella Fitzgerald. You've sung in every major venue in the world. You've won Grammys. You can do this." The introduction came from the White House social secretary. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President and Mrs. Kennedy are honored to present Miss Ella Fitzgerald." Applause. Ella walked out onto the small stage, elegant and composed. She smiled at the audience, acknowledged President Kennedy and Jackie with a graceful nod, and moved to the microphone. The piano began. Ella started singing, her voice pure, controlled, every note exactly where it should be. The first song was "Summertime," a sophisticated choice that showcased her range and interpretive ability without being too showy. The audience was attentive, appreciative. This was going perfectly. The second song was "Someone to Watch Over Me," a Gershwin standard that Ella made sound both wistful and sophisticated. Halfway through the second verse, she shifted her weight slightly and felt her left heel snap. The break was clean and complete, the heel separating entirely from the sole with an almost inaudible crack that Ella felt more than heard. Suddenly she was listing to the left, unbalanced, her weight distribution completely wrong. One foot was 3 inches higher than the other. For a split second, pure panic flooded through her. She was performing for the President of the United States, for the First Lady who noticed every detail. For the French Prime Minister and his delegation, representatives of a country with a 1,000-year cultural tradition who were probably skeptical that American jazz belonged in the same conversation as European classical music. For 200 diplomats, senators, cultural figures, all watching her every move, and her shoe had just broken. Options flashed through her mind in the fraction of a second between one note and the next, her voice continuing on autopilot while her brain raced. Stop singing immediately. Apologize, explain what happened, ask for a moment to fix the situation. But that would interrupt the performance, break the spell of the music, force everyone to shift from appreciating art to feeling awkward sympathy. It would make the shoe the story instead of the song. And every guest would remember not her voice but her embarrassment. Try to keep singing while standing awkwardly on one 3-inch heel and one flat foot. Shift her weight constantly, try to hide the limp, but that would look unprofessional, distracted. More importantly, standing at such an angle would affect her posture, her breathing, her diaphragm support, everything that made her voice work properly. The music would suffer, and everyone would notice something was wrong even if they couldn't immediately identify what. Stumble off stage. Indicate she needed a moment, exit as gracefully as possible with one broken heel, fix or change the shoes, return to finish. But that would be even worse, literally limping away in front of the President, leaving the audience confused and uncomfortable, creating an interruption that would dominate the entire evening's memory. Or the option that required the most. Confidence, the choice that demanded absolute commitment. The response that could either look incredibly sophisticated or completely bizarre depending entirely on how she executed it. Simply step out of both shoes and continue barefoot as if this had always been the plan. Ella made her decision in the space between one note and the next. Without breaking her phrasing, without missing a beat, without stopping the song, she gracefully stepped out of both shoes. Just slipped her feet out, left the shoes where they stood, and continued singing barefoot. The movement was so smooth, so natural, that many people in the audience didn't even notice at first. Those who did see it happen were struck by the absolute lack of awkwardness. No apology, no explanation, no drawing attention to it. Just a quiet adjustment and continuation. Ella kept singing, her voice never wavering. If anything, standing barefoot seemed to ground her more solidly. The song continued, beautiful and controlled, exactly as it should be. From the front row, Jackie Kennedy noticed. She always noticed details. She saw the shoes standing empty on the stage, saw Ella continuing barefoot with absolute composure, and her eyebrows raised slightly in what might have been surprise or admiration. The song ended, applause, warm and genuine. Ella smiled, acknowledged it gracefully, gave no indication anything unusual had happened. The third song began. Ella remained barefoot, performing as if this had always been the plan. No self-consciousness, no apology in her body language, just professionalism. By the fourth song, more people in the audience had noticed the shoes. Whispers began, "Is she barefoot? What happened? Did you see that?" But the whispers weren't scandalized. They were impressed. Someone performing for the president, faced with an embarrassing wardrobe malfunction, had handled it with such grace that it almost seemed intentional. Sophisticated even, Ella continued through her set, 6 songs total, each one perfectly delivered. The final song was How High the Moon, a showcase for her scat singing that brought the house down. By this point, no one cared about shoes. They were watching a master at work. The performance ended to a standing ovation. President Kennedy was on his feet, applauding enthusiastically. Jackie stood as well, clapping with that particular smile that meant genuine appreciation rather than polite obligation. Ella bowed, thanked the audience, and walked off stage, still barefoot, still graceful. The broken shoes left standing on the stage like a sculpture. Backstage, Ella finally let herself react. She looked down at her bare feet and started laughing. The adrenaline was wearing off and the absurdity hit her. She just performed for the President of the United States in bare feet. A White House aide appeared. "Miss Fitzgerald, the President and Mrs. Kennedy would like to greet you." Ella's laughter stopped. I'm barefoot." "I'll get your shoes," the aide said, gesturing to someone to retrieve them from the stage. A moment later, someone brought the shoes. The broken heel dangled uselessly. Ella looked at them ruefully. "These aren't going to help much. Mrs. Kennedy is coming backstage," another aide said, slightly panicked. "Should we find you other shoes?" Before Ella could answer, Jackie Kennedy appeared in the doorway. She took in the scene, Ella standing barefoot, holding the broken shoe, looking apologetic. Jackie walked directly to Ella, and instead of the formal greeting Ella expected, the First Lady smiled warmly, not the public smile she gave at receptions, but something genuine. "That," Jackie said, "was the most elegant thing I've ever seen." Ella was startled. "Mrs. Kennedy, I'm so sorry. My heel broke during the second song and I didn't want to interrupt the performance or make everyone uncomfortable, so I just..." "Don't apologize," Jackie interrupted gently but firmly. "Please, you have nothing to apologize for. You made a split-second decision under enormous pressure and handled it with perfect grace. Most people, most trained performers even, would have stumbled, stopped the song, apologized profusely, drawn everyone's attention to the problem and made the whole room uncomfortable. You simply adapted and continued as if nothing happened, as if singing barefoot at the White House had always been your intention. That's not just professionalism, that's artistry, that's confidence." She looked down at Ella's bare feet, then at her own elegant heels, pale pink to match her gown, probably custom-made, definitely expensive. "I'm afraid my shoes wouldn't fit you. Your feet are smaller than mine. But I wish I could lend them to you because I think you've earned them more than I have tonight. You showed everyone in that room what real elegance looks like. It's not about having perfect clothes or perfect circumstances. It's about handling imperfect ones with grace." President Kennedy joined them, having finished greeting other guests. "Magnificent performance, Miss Fitzgerald," he said in that distinctive Boston accent. "Though I have to say, in all my time in Washington, you're the first person to go barefoot in the White House and make it look not just acceptable, but sophisticated. If we'd known that was an option, half the men here would have ditched their uncomfortable dress shoes hours ago." The small group backstage laughed, and Ella felt the tension she'd been holding since the heel snapped finally start to dissolve. "I keep thinking about how you handled that moment," Jackie continued, her voice more serious now. "The heel breaking. You had maybe a second to decide what to do. Stop and apologize, try to hobble through, make excuses. Any of those would have been understandable. But instead, you chose the option that required the most confidence, to simply acknowledge the problem silently and continue. You know what that is? Grace under pressure. Hemingway defined courage that way, grace under pressure. I think it applies to elegance as well, to professionalism, to character." Ella felt tears forming and tried to blink them back. She'd been so worried about making a mistake, about embarrassing herself or the Kennedys or her country in front of international guests, about proving that American music and American artists belonged on the world stage. And instead, the First Lady, the woman known for impossibly high standards, the woman who'd brought Pablo Casals to the White House and filled it with museum-quality art, was calling her elegant, courageous, was using Hemingway to describe how she'd handled a broken shoe. "Thank you," Ella managed. "This evening meant everything to me. I'm sorry about the shoes, Ella," Jackie said firmly. "The shoes made it perfect. Anyone can perform well when everything goes right. The measure of a professional is how they handle things when they go wrong. You just taught everyone in that room a lesson about grace." Later that night, back at her hotel, Ella sat with the broken shoes. She should probably throw them away, but something made her keep them. They became a reminder, not of the mishap, but of the response, of the moment she chose grace over panic. Of Jackie Kennedy's words, "Grace under pressure," the story spread quickly. Within days, newspapers picked it up not as scandal but as human interest. The celebrated jazz singer who handled a wardrobe malfunction with such poise that the First Lady praised her for it. Other performers started sharing their own disaster stories. Ella's White House moment became shorthand for professional grace. Years later, people would ask Ella about her most memorable performances. She'd often mention that evening, not because it was perfect, she'd say, but because it wasn't. My heel broke halfway through. Instead of panicking, I kicked off both shoes and kept singing. Mrs. Kennedy called it grace under pressure. Looking back, I think she was right. How you handle problems matters more than whether you have them. The broken shoes stayed in Ella's home for the rest of her life, displayed among her Grammy awards. "Those are from the White House," she'd explain. "The night I performed barefoot for President Kennedy. The night Jackie Kennedy taught me that grace under pressure isn't about things going right. It's about how you respond when they go wrong." In 1996, when Ella died, those shoes were found among her most treasured possessions, not hidden away but displayed, a reminder of the night she chose elegance over embarrassment, the moment when her heel snapped and she could have stopped, could have apologized, could have drawn attention to the problem. But instead, in one smooth motion, she stepped out of both shoes and kept singing. Grace under pressure, professionalism when it mattered most. The ability to turn disaster into triumph simply by refusing to let it become one. February 12, 1962, the White House, a broken heel, and a First Lady who recognized that sometimes the most sophisticated response to a problem is to simply, gracefully continue.